Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first week of a new unit, Managing Human Resources for Business. Let's look at the objectives for this week. We're going to look at 1.1, which is to explain the main purpose of human resources in contemporary business practice. So we're looking at business practice today, really, because human resources have been around for a long time and it has changed. So we're going to focus on it in contemporary business practice. 1.2 is to differentiate between transactional and transformational models. So there are two models of human resource management. Most departments have actually moved towards the transformational one. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So transactional, I suppose, is a little bit old-fashioned. Transformational is sort of the way forward now in contemporary practice. 1.3, we're going to look at summarising some of the professional areas which comprise the HR profession. So let's just think about some of the areas which they need to be able to work within. Okay, so what is the purpose of human resources? It's sort of as its name suggests, it's the management of an organisation's human capital. And I don't really mean money, I mean people as well. Okay, that is capital. They are your assets, your capital assets. So where personnel management used to be known as personnel management, more often than not, it once really looked at very much the basics, how do you recruit someone, how do we pay them, and the general sort of day-to-day issues, paperwork, putting contracts together, making sure things happened at the right time, making people's salary changes when they had their annual appraisals, those sort of things. It's very much carrying out the nuts and bolts that supported the managers in their work. That's sort of changed, really, although they do those aspects as well. Some of these aspects have actually moved down into the local teams, and some of them are in the hands of the managers and their supervisors and team leaders. Contemporary human resource manager is much more holistic now. It looks at a sort of wide circle of employee relations. So it looks sort of big picture. What are the new legislations? What do we have to do to change the organisation to meet them? Those sorts of things. We're changing the goals of our organisation. How do we change the teams? How do we change the skill set? So it's a much more wider and holistic approach. And that's included sort of things like motivating staffs, getting involved with training and looking at people's career development. So it's a little bit more forward thinking, really. But one part of human resources is about managing employees' rights, really, as they shouldn't be just maintained, but they need to be, endorsed and supported. A lot of consumers are becoming a lot more socially aware. I mean, some of you may have already decided that there are some organizations or companies that you won't buy things from anymore because you don't like their background or you don't like the sort of things that they do. And a lot of people are very sort of aware of that. Social media has really helped with that. And it's to me, of course, some companies to go down. So for an example, companies who endorse sweatshop labour are very much falling out of favour with the consumer market, especially those who've got the money to sort of move around and maybe go to something a little bit more expensive than just looking at the cheaper stuff around. So it might not be. So I'm just thinking of fast fashion, really. If you're a young girl, maybe a teenager at school, you only have so much money to spend, to be able to buy something, and you still want to be fashionable and look nice. So sometimes you have no choice to go from the sort of cheapest areas like Primark, Boohoo, those sort of places. But what is coming out is that a lot of the fast fashion companies are actually by having these stuff made in places where the employees are treated very, very badly. They're hardly paid at all. They can be in, other countries where they don't have the same sort of employee rights that they do. So you might be a young person in UK buying a new dress or a top. It could be made thousands of miles away, somewhere where the people who are making it are treated very, very badly. Now you may have the money to do that. You may not have the awareness to know about that, but when you do get the awareness, you may choose to say, all right, well, I might save up and buy the more expensive one. Or, if you can't afford to do it when you're younger, when you're older and maybe you're earning a little bit better, you actually make conscious decisions. Right? I'm not going to go to Boohoo anymore. And this actually did happen. And Boohoo, which was probably in the UK an absolute booming young person's fashion market, has really, really suffered to the point that it's teetering on the edge, really, of disappearing. So employees' rights are relevant, but in sort of first world countries, there's an expectation that employees' rights are met and considered. And a lot of people find out about companies about how good they are with their employees. So if you're looking for a new job, and especially if you're someone who's quite skilled and experienced, who might be fought over by different companies, then you're going to look for someone where the treatment of their employees is pretty good, really. So the HR role encompasses quite a few things. I've mentioned some already. And be it sort of the traditional method or the transformational method, still some bits have to be done. It's just some people work in a more strategic area as well, which probably means there's a bigger HR team. But they're still responsible for recruitment, getting involved with training and professional development, creating job descriptions, doing evaluations and salary negotiation. They may be a lot more involved in managing staff conflicts. They're still producing policies and procedures to do with staff. Dealing with benefits, making sure that taxes, pensions, leave, all that is all calculated and created. So they're the routine day-to-day stuff. But on top of that, really, they're starting to look more about people's well-being, general wellness, creating a safe environment, trying to, making sure there's no discrimination in the environment, but male or female or something like that, as well as really looking at making sure that the people that they help to employ are really focused on the organizational goals. So HR has a bigger role nowadays in being involved with achieving those organizational goals by making sure they get the right people in. Okay. So, transactional versus transformational, that is a question that's asked of you, and you need to address it for the assignment. So, transactional or traditional HR is very much, as I said, the day-to-day mechanics, the sort of routine. It's sort of very practical. It's to do with writing policies. It's to do with filling in forms. It's to do with making things get done. Transformational HR is about standing above the routine, as I said, sort of having a bit more of a helicopter view and sort of things and trying to think a lot more strategically. How can we align with the organisational's goals? So that really expands your role. What do we do? How do we make our job work with the organisational goals? How do we encourage the workers to follow the organisational roles? So it does incorporate the traditional HR duties, um, but it's, as I said, it's more creative and it's got a wider thought. So the transactional HR is very administrative and it tends to be reactive. So a manager comes along and says, I need a new, so and so's leaving, I need a new bloke to replace him. So reactive, okay, I'll put together all the paperwork that we need and we'll do your advert, such like. The transformational ones will be sort of thinking ahead of time. If so and so's starting, if they see that people are starting to make moves, they'll be talking to the manager. Let's start to plan. Are you going to be recruiting? How many more people do you need? Are you going to make a change in this direction? What do we need to skill people up? Will we need more staff? So they're really thinking sort of very much ahead of time. And in fact, they might be going to managers saying, we think you need more people in this area, or we think the people you've got don't have the skills to meet the new goals that the board has decided upon. So what can we do about it? So as I said, it expands the traditional role and it's really very much focused on the business objectives. So you need to have, if you're a transformational HR worker, you're going to have a wider bunch of skills than just doing the paperwork that you sort of did before with a pretty good knowledge of employment law. Um, so really, they're not mutually exclusive. As I said, you've got to run both elements of it. So it doesn't mean that if you're a transformational HR worker, you've stopped doing all the sort of what I call the bread and butter of the work. You are still making sure people's appraisals are happening. You are helping with all the recruitment, making sure employment law is met. But you also need to be thinking strategically. And it's that strategic thinking that for some HR workers might be very new, but if you're doing sort of more recent training, they'll be more prepared to do that as well. There's a quick graphic for you. Transformational HR is often called strategic HR. You will see it, you know, it, it's used in both ways really. So if you see strategic, they mean transformational. So quick one really, so traditional HR, responsibility for staff. Some of the HR management is picked up by line managers and supervisors now, some things. So because people often have automated ways of doing things, electronic ways, it's not so time consuming for the line managers and they're able to sort of create their own adverts. Some of them want to as well because so instead of leaving it all to HR, they actually take a bit more of a leadership role themselves. The focus used to be very much on employee relations internally, but they can have a focus more externally as well by talking to competitors, talking to professional bodies on behalf of the workers, those sorts of things really. Um, as I said, the traditional one, they're very much a follower. They do, they pretty much do. If the organisation wants to change, then they make changes. But in the strategic approach, they're involved in the changes as they're being thought of and created. So there'll always be sort of a HR element when the board is creating new goals, if they do it well, that is. So they can often be the initiator of something rather than just the reactor to it. The key investments really, they look at products and policies and, how much money is to be spent sort of on training or that. Whereas strategically, the key investment is in the people. So it's not about just, buying a new online system that, does a lot of the work quicker. The strategic HR will be thinking about more, where they invest their budget areas in people's training, people's development, those sorts of things. Okay. So have a little look at that. Hopefully that's just a quick way of showing you. And you can, out of that, you can pick a couple of things to write about when you're asked. Okay. One of the questions that we're looking at is really to summarise the professional areas which comprise the HR profession. So I've got a little graphic here, which has been created by the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development, which is pretty much the guiding body for HR in the UK, really. And they've created this, how it fits together. This, they call it the CIPD HR map, and it's for all the workers, no matter what level they're at, to know sort of where they are, really. And part of the map is it has 4 bands, and the 4 bands of competence, and that really sort of takes people in from the entry level up to senior level, and they build up and expand their competence, and move up in bands. And it might take 4 years, they might do it quicker than that, but it's for the people who especially people who are quite new to HR, maybe they're recently qualified. It gives them a guideline of where they should be, really. So with all of these bands, they're all focused in the same area. The main key areas are client relationships, the activities that they have to do, where they spend their time, what sort of service they can offer, and how do they measure, how do they see their results. So whatever band they're in, they're still focusing on those few areas, really. And also, the map has been divided into 8 behaviours that actually support the HR work. And these behaviours define how a HR professional should act and think, and to support the development under 10 professional areas. So if you look in the darker blue, you've got the 8 professional areas, and then around the outside, you've got the sort of types of behaviours or types of approach that are expected of people. So moving towards the professional areas, we can see that right in the centre, underpinning everything, are 2 core areas, which is insights, strategy, and solutions. And then around that, leading HR. And coming out of that, you have the sort of specific professional behaviours. Okay, let's have a look at that in a little bit more detail. Okay, so the professional areas, as I said, at the centre of the circle was insight, strategy, and solutions. And that's about developing an understanding of the organisations, having insight into what the organisation is, and then being involved in creating the strategy for the future. So what do we need to do now? What do we need to do in the future? And that's being sort of very much in tune with the board and senior management about what their objectives and goals are. Surrounding that is leading HR, where you're acting as a role model. HR is always expected to act as a role model, and you have to maximize your contribution. Now, there might be some specialist HR staff who work with particular workers that are, in a very specialist area. So they might not do every part of it. They might just do a little bit, but they still have to follow the 2 central themes: insight, strategy, and solutions, and leading HR. And through that role modeling, it's really about making the organization, again, meeting the goals and developing people to be able to meet the goals as well. Organization design and organization development is pretty much one thing, really. And that's about making sure, again, the design of the organization fits the needs for maximum impact, and that you're making sure that capability and requirements again follow the strategy that the senior management has created. And with the organisational development, it's about actually driving the culture. So considering, again, being led by the board, what's the culture of the organisation? How do we want it to be? What sort of behaviours do we expect from our staff? What sort of skills do we expect them to have? And what performance are we looking for? And Really, you might get involved with projects, change management projects. You need to give some incitement into that, because HR staff are expected to have those background skills in project management, skill management, and they can support and advise project team managers, especially someone that might be new to them and they've been asked to step up and do um, a, a project change. Then HR should be there guiding them with the best way to do it. Resourcing and talent planning, that's really about looking at your workforce, making sure you've got all the resources that you need, be them people resources or be them stuff, really. Making sure that the capability, you've recruited the right people and you've got the talent in to actually react to the changes and react to the strategy that's required. They have a responsibility for learning and development. Again, it's about building capacity in the organization. And again, making sure that if you may have taken on some people who are at the beginning of their career, so they need to develop their skills. They may have some, but they may not have all of them, and that you have an ongoing skills and training development process for these people, for members of the team, to actually get to where they need to be. So not everybody will be taken on at the top of their ability, because you probably can't afford to pay those people. You might even have apprentices working for you. You might have young people who are not long out of school. So a lot of people need training and development. And again, if the organisation wants to go down a different direction, it might be a piece of training that everybody needs. So HR will take the lead in that, really. And it's their responsibility to try to create a nice learning culture. They have a role for performance and reward. They've always had that role, really. And it's about trying to keep a high achieving organization. So, making sure that the rewards are there. And you do that again with line managers, through personnel, and through performance and appraisal. You need to make sure that reward systems work for the organization. Are they market relevant? Are they fair? Are they cost effective? Can you actually afford to do them? I mean, if you're in a public sector organizations, you don't tend to have, um, you very rarely tend to have reward systems. But if you're in a private organization, you can have reward systems. You can have commission, you can have extra days off, you can have some bonuses at the end of the year, all sorts of things, really. So it would be up to the HR team to sort of be involved in that creation, thinking strategically, making sure that if somebody comes to you with an idea about a reward system, that the organisation can afford it, it suits their ethos, and they can go forward with it. Employee engagement, and that's about being connecting with the staff, connecting with their work, making sure that people are able to work together and getting some sort of job satisfaction and fulfillment out of it. And that's about finding out to make sure that some people are contributing towards the objective, but also trying to nip it in the bud where people aren't doing their work as well. You have to remember, I mean, it's not all positive. It's not all, we want everyone to be happy and do well. What do we do if people aren't doing well? Is it because they're choosing to? Is there some other problem? That would fall into their responsibility. Employee engagement, getting out there and talking to them, finding out what their needs are, and then employee relations, making sure that there is a good relationship between the management and the employees. So they will take quite a leading role in that, really, as well as do individual managers and supervisors, team leaders, etc. But that needs to be underpinned by particular policies and practices, and you have to work within employment law as well. And again, if a manager's not sure, they need HR to turn to guide them. Service delivery and information is something that maybe the traditional HR team didn't get so involved in. They just made sure that everybody was employed properly. They didn't necessarily get involved with whether someone's actually doing their job well or delivering service to the customer. So, in this sense, because they have a more strategic role, they have to think about excellence across the whole life cycle of the employee, right down to their service delivery with their customer, and thinking about what can we do with the employees to improve service delivery. So when the board are looking about it, saying, well, our results aren't as good as that company over there that does the same job as us, how can we improve it? Then HR will be involved in it, saying it might be about training, it might be about staff attitude, it might be about staff dissatisfaction. I'm going to go out and find out. Okay, so I also mentioned the 8 behaviours. They sort of go without saying, really. This is what the CIPD thinks good, transformative or strategic HR staff. They should have these behaviours. They should be curious. Which means they should be open-minded. They should be looking for information. Don't just accept things. Go out and find out about it. Looking for things, looking for ways to add value. Always looking for change. Really, they need to be decisive thinkers. They need to be able to analyze and understand data and information quite quickly, so they can make decisions quickly. Because if there's some issues about employment law and they can't make a decision and advise quickly, well, that's quite hard for the manager who they're supporting. They need to be skilled influencers as well. So again, being able to get all sorts of different stakeholders. Remember, they sit on the outside. They've got senior management up in the board. They've got front-facing workers, and they've got everybody in between all the lines of management. And they've got to be able to influence them. They've got to be able to get them on board. If there's a change coming, and sometimes it might not be a change that people like, and sometimes the organisation doesn't want to go down that road, but they don't have any choice. It could be a legislation change, or it could be a change in the market that you're a bit stuck with. But the HR team need to be the influencers that bring people along with them. So from that respect, they need to be personally credible. People need to believe them. They need to respect them. They need to have a bit of a role model, and they need to show expertise and knowledge that the managers can be, feel safe and comfortable with. They need to be collaborative, able to work together with other people. They need to be driven to deliver, and they need the enthusiasm, and they need determination. They need to be resourceful. They need to be able to sort of, look around, think out the box, come up with a different idea. Courage to challenge, and that means they may have to challenge someone more senior than them who's maybe not following the legislation properly, and they're saying, well, if you don't do this, you're in trouble. Very difficult to approach. So they need to have that courage to stand up and deal with people. If they don't, or with a difficult worker who has caused problems, maybe in other companies as well. But if they don't have the courage to challenge, very often the problem gets worse and worse, and they'd wish they had. I mentioned before being a role model. Yes, they need to be a role model. They need to act with integrity. They need to be impartial. And they need to try to be independent, really, balancing all the needs of the organisation. But sometimes they have to stand away from it because they have a sort of advisory role as well as a strategic role. So they can't be sort of pulled in to make, a manager happy when actually it's not gonna support the big picture overall. There's some references for you. As I said, the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development has got huge amounts of stuff, for human resource workers. So it's really, really very helpful. It's a UK based website, but it's all about good practice, really. So, I mean, a lot of the stuff would be covered elsewhere, really, in my view. So you can have a look at that. Okay, little bit of guided study for you. I've added a reading resource, fairly very large one, on strategic HR management. You might not read every page because it's quite large, but I'd like you to dip into it really and look out for some useful points. Think about the criteria that we've got for our assignment and just think about things that you might need to write about. So just jot down some ideas, start getting prepared and doing a little work on your assignments before the actual assignment comes out. Because whatever the assignment is, it's going to address these criteria. Okay. So, all right, you may not have the actual layout of the assignment, although I'm going to drop some hints along the way for this assignment. So you will have some ideas. Okay, so that's it. That's it for this week. As I said, please have a look at the resource on strategic HR management and give a little bit of reflection on what I've been talking about as well. Jot down some ideas. You know where to contact me. So if there's anything that I've said that you're not sure about, anything that you read that's either contradicting or confusing, just contact me and I'll feed back to you. Okay, so good luck and I'll see you next week.